and then we will get started. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for hopping on to our first Next Gen United official event for this fiscal year, which runs from July 1st through June 30th, June 30th of the calendar year. We really appreciate y'all being a part of this. I know so many of you are here because you are donors, and many of you are here to learn some valuable information from United Way of Broward County's funded partners. So thanks to our donors for providing those dollars to keep our funded partners open and running, and to give us this valuable insight that they will present to us today. So I would like to introduce our panelists really quickly. We do have Elkin Alfred from United Way of Broward County, who is the Training Manager and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Champion. We also have Courtnee Biscardi, who serves as Executive Vice President for the Urban League of Broward County in Fort Lauderdale. Thank you, Courtnee. We have Felipe Pinzon, who is with Hispanic Unity of Florida. He is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Programs. Up next, Jose Lopez Masso, who is the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Development at Lighthouse of Broward. And lastly, but not least, we have Olivia Angeli, who is the Assistant Director of Educational Programs at the Center for Hearing and Communication in our Florida office. So thank you all so very much for being here today to help us all understand many different a little bit more about the different communities that we have here in Broward County, and several of the obstacles that they may have overcome or are overcoming right now. So I would like to start with Elkin. If everybody would please mute their lines, that would be excellent. Elkin, I noticed that, so we do have this discussion labeled as a DEI discussion. But I understand that there are now 2 new letters that have been added to this. So what are those letters, and why have they been added to DE and I?
All right, so great question. So the 2 new letters are AR, which stands for anti-racism. And so if anyone is familiar with the diversity, equity, inclusion space, you know that many organizations, big and small, have really been operating in this space and looking at recruitment, orientation as it relates to diversity, and not just diversity in race and gender, but just diversity in thought, diversity in experience, whether or not you're a veteran or you're an able-bodied person. And so anti-racism work needs to be specifically identified, because D&I work is not anti-racism work. And the reason why it's not is because anti-racism work specifically centers racism. And so where D&I work sort of kind of glosses over race, right, issues, anti-racism really centers our work and our efforts around addressing systemic racism or systemic and institutionalized racism.
Oh no, I did the mute thing. Thank you so much, Elkin. So also, next question is also for you. Do you have ideas on how we can be anti-racist? And this, of course, doesn't just have to be for the workplace. I believe that this stems from our day-to-day lives as well as going over into our workplace.
So there's a couple of things to do, right? There's like a 3-pronged approach, and that is first to normalize the conversation around anti-racism. So first admitting that racism exists, and it's alive and well in all of our systems, and many of our systems are operating as they were designed to, and that means that they were designed to promote inequity. So that's the first thing, creating a common language around anti-racism. So maybe with your staff, your team, you're doing a session on just being familiar with the language around equity. What does equity really mean? When an organization says that they're fighting for racial equity, what does that mean? That means that no longer will your race or your socioeconomic status will determine your health outcomes, your housing outcomes. And so really centering a normal conversation or normal practices around talking about identifying race, right? The next thing is really setting systems in place where you can gather data and metrics. So if you're going to solve this issue, what do you have in place to collect the data to let us know, are we trending in the right direction or are we trending in the wrong direction? So the data that you can collect looks like, how are your Black employees doing? Are they successful? Are you recruiting enough Latinx or Latino members into your community? Are they serving on your board? You know, those things matter. And then not only are you recruiting them, but what are you doing to keep them, right? What is the attrition rate in your organization? What is it, how long are your employees of color are staying engaged? And then the last thing is, who makes up your executive suite level, right? Oftentimes in nonprofit, what we find is that direct care service providers look like me, but the higher up you go, they don't look like me. They tend to be white men, right? And so we have to have a conversation on why does that exist? Is it because of lack of mentorship, lack of sponsorship, and then also making sure that we understand the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, right? So sponsorship is saying, I have your back and I'm gonna bring you into rooms, right? I'm gonna speak your name in rooms that you're not present in. And I'm gonna do that with the intentionality to make sure that you have an opportunity to grow in your career. And the last thing is kind of reevaluating the data. And so one of the things that we're looking at internally is the use of pulse surveys. So pulse surveys are a great opportunity to quickly check what does the feel like in the office? Do people feel included? Is there a sense of belonging? And oftentimes we use this phrase, you know, let's create a safe space. So I want us to remove the idea of creating a safe space and move towards the idea of creating a brave space, right? Because safe spaces don't allow people to really address their concerns. But when it's a brave space, you're letting people know you're going to be uncomfortable, and that is okay. And in order for us to make progress, we all have to be uncomfortable. So part of it is really creating an environment where brave spaces thrive and are expected, so then you can make the practical policy changes that you need to make.
Wonderful. So you're not growing unless you're uncomfortable, right?
Yes, yes. And I like to say I like to make people uncomfortable in a good way. And you need people who are going to be like good trouble, right? Like John Lewis talks about, like, be good trouble in your workplace, especially if you want to move the equity needle forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Elkin. And then we have Courtnee from Urbanly. This next question is for you. It's actually the same question. Do you have any valuable advice to offer for being anti-racist as well?
Yeah, I think Elkin took all the great stuff, but I will do my best to add to it. I concur with her comments, and admitting first, I think that there's a challenge is really critical. I'm fortunate to work for an organization where over 85% of us are Black or Brown within the organization at all levels. So direct service level into the executive suite, we are 100% people of color, and our board is predominantly people of color as well. So I'm really proud of that, but it doesn't mean that we're perfect. I think to your point around the pulse checking is really important. How confident do people feel, you know, within the work environment? How brave or authentic conversations that they could have within the organization, do those exist? And we're testing those waters now, you know, on the surface, because of the number of people within our organization who are of color. It's easy to say they've got it, right? They've got it all together. But we are, if we believe that that is what the community should reflect, anti-racism, then we need to ensure in-house that we are also anti-racist and that we are doing our very best internally with our staff and how we engage with community in the same way. So I always like to do the gut check first. And that's the work that we are doing. And similarly, we are having conversations with our donors, asking them to come to the table to talk about their internal policies and practices and evaluating them to see whether or not there are limiting factors that perpetuate racism or prevent or create barriers for individuals of color to have access to their business. I think, you know, I love the statement that you used, Elkin, around brave space. And, you know, it is easy to say safe space, but it takes a level of audacity to raise concerns when you see them within the organization. And so does your culture support or promote individuals who have big ideas or are challenged by something, and they respect and honor that and allow those ideas to come to light? I think it's really a part of creating that culture. But one of the things that always comes up for me when I think about anti-racism, you know, I say that I have been Black for 42 years, right? And so you, over time, don't even realize the experiences that you've had over time, having grown up in predominantly white schools for a lot of my life, in primary education. But then you realize over time the little nicks and digs that have happened over the years. They call it microaggression, right? That, you know, subtle, perhaps unintentional comments that are made over time, and how they just gnaw at you, you know. And often people would say to me, "You're so well spoken," right? And, you know, I'm thinking, I'm speaking proper English. Is that something unique to people, you know, who are not Black? You know, why is that always coming up for me? And the reason why I bring it up in an anti-racist framework is because it's sometimes just those small things, those changes in behavior that you're willing to employ that gets us to a better, you know, space. You know, it's not always intentional. Somebody might actually think they're making a compliment, right? But I think it takes a brave space for somebody to say, well, what did you mean by that? Right? And have a person really reflect on, wow, well, I just think that you speak well, and it's not, I haven't seen many people like you who speak the way that you do. I mean, it allows you to engage in dialogue that is healthy, that is tough, but that is healthy. And I do think that those are some of the small things that create an opportunity to have an environment that's a little more anti-racist every day, in addition to what Elkin has said. But then microaggression for people of color over time, you don't really realize how it creates a little trauma over time, and can be emotionally taxing for people of color. So I say it because, again, folks don't realize what they're doing. But at the point that you decide to be brave and say, what do you mean by that? You create an opportunity to help educate folks on how perhaps they could start doing a thing better.
Thank you so much, Courtney. That was wonderful. And Felipe, I have a question for you. So what do you see in the Hispanic community as some potential challenges in confronting DEI and anti-racism in the workplace?
Thank you, Katrina and United Way, for inviting me to participate in this conversation. I don't know how smart I was by accepting the invitation, and I'll tell you why. Just number one, my remarks really come from my own experience, my personal experience, and what I have seen over the years, and don't come from any research or studies or any scientific, you know, articles out there. It just come from what I have seen, and I get very emotional when it comes to this subject for several reasons. Before I tell you, you know, or before I answer your question, I believe that I realize that I'm promoting myself, you know, some of the white privilege and the white supremacy, you know, characteristics. So I do it myself, and I have seen that every single day. I have seen people around me, whether they are family members, colleagues at Hispanic community or other places, that actually do the same, and they're racist. And I made the decision a few years ago to speak up every time, you know, I needed to speak up, but that's getting me in trouble, by the way. So I'm telling you this, you know, and that's why I don't know how smart I was by accepting this invitation. So please, don't think that my remarks, you know, are the truth. They just come from my own experience. So to answer your question, Catherine, I believe immigrants, for the most part in Broward County, are new to this country. I mean, this is not Miami-Dade. So talking about many Colombians like me, Venezuelans, and other people from South America. And that comes, you know, that results in several issues. One of them is, back in our countries, we didn't talk about racial issues. We just never did. So we come to this country, and then the concept itself is new to us. That by itself is a major issue, because sometimes we don't see that we are part of the issue, and we believe that actually this is an issue others are facing, so we don't take, part of it. The lack of knowledge, there is, if any, is very limited. So we don't participate in these conversations. And over the years, we have adopted, as I said before, back from our countries, some of the white supremacy, characteristics. And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. Courtnee said that she has been, Black for the last 42 years. Guess what? 20 years ago, when I came to this country, I realized that I was not white, that I was brown. So now it's an identity issue, right? Now you're facing something you never actually knew about it or grew up with. So that itself is another issue. And something else I see in the Latino community is this lack of diversity for one reason or another, whether it is by country or whether it's just the Latino community in general, tend to isolate themselves, whether it's the Colombians and the Venezuelans. And I think that happens across, all cultures, but we see that, in the Latino community. If I try to translate everything that I said before into what we're trying to do at Hispanic community, I can tell you that about 5 years ago, we realized that we were not being inclusive. And we were just focused on serving Hispanics. We made the decision then to actually start serving immigrants, regardless where they come from, to trying to be more inclusive. Today, 40% of the clients we serve are non-Hispanic. We still have a lot to do in that regards. We still have to make sure that the staff we hire reflects the community we serve. So those are some of the issues, including, and I guess I want to close my remarks by saying, I think that, and this is in general, this is not just for Latinos, I think that we still have to do a lot of work, about getting to know ourselves, in how we carry out those, biases and including, racism. I think that we have a lot of that in ourselves. So personally, I will start a journey in September. It will be a 2-year journey with Pro-Inspire. I will be part of a cohort, to learn who I am as a leader and how I can contribute, to this issue in a better way.
Thank you so much, Felipe. And you can't deny people of their experiences. Those are their experiences. So thank you for sharing that. We do also, I have another question for Urban League. You don't mind, Courtnee? So we have, hopefully all of us have seen the video of systemic racism. So kind of touching on that a little bit. If you have not, please try to find it. You can email me and I'll provide a link to you. But in regards to that, Courtnee, are there kids from lower income areas that are attracted to certain industries? And I'm thinking about our future workplaces that we're going to have with our children. Are you seeing a trend in particular programs that are either offered through Urban League or college electives, maybe that are to be, so we might have a little bit of an idea of what the future of Broward County might look like?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think one of the things that we really try to do in developing programming is look at the trends and where we see opportunity. If we want to be in a position to increase wealth for Black people or people of color, we have to identify those high growth, high demand industries where there's an opportunity for families to earn a living wage and where there's upward mobility. And so I say that to start off the response, because I do believe what we try to do is create an appetite for kids. We know that there is a void of people of color in the STEM field, but there's significant opportunity there. We know that technology and even the supply chain industries, that there is a career ladder in terms of certification and degrees that can be earned that really allow for people to earn a living wage exists, but we're not, we meaning Black people, are not as visible or present in those industries as need be. And so Darwyn is actually on the line and leads our STEM effort. But one of the reasons why we got into doing STEM programming is because the data suggested that we're not there. And when we look at the wealth disparity, that whites essentially do make nearly 10 times more wealth than African Americans. I mean, 17,000 from 117,000, I mean, is kind of crazy, right? So how do you increase those wealth opportunities for communities? So when we think about our youth, how do we develop an interest on their part to engage in STEM-related activities? How do we keep it interactive and fun so that they see that's something I have an interest in, I have an appetite for that? So they go from interest into maybe securing coursework that's in alignment with STEM, into securing degrees and certifications that are in alignment with STEM, that increase their likelihood of securing employment that pays them well, that essentially can increase or level the playing field where we see disparity today. And so a lot of our program really involves looking at data to inform that which we want to put, make available for our youth. STEM is one of those areas. But I would say on the technology side too, how do we create industry certifications and pathways to job opportunities related to technology, that there's money to be made in that field. And we do believe that the certifications and programs that we offered, oftentimes with local schools like Broward College, give us a real good opportunity of later increasing wealth for communities of color. I hope I answered the question, but that's kind of where we're trending today.
I wanted to jump in, Courtney, and really highlight the work you all are doing at Urban League, because one of the programs I had the opportunity to participate in is a Day in Medicine. And so it was about 30 to 40 Urban League students, participants who went to NSU MD, worked with their new medical school students, and they really did interactive activities and looked at the intersection of medicine and technology. And it was such an amazing experience. And what I loved about it is that the students that were selected weren't just students who we look at as high potential, but also students who were in the juvenile justice department. And to see them walk out with new interests, right? A group of students who people like to kind of throw away, but who walk out saying, you know what, I think I want to be a doctor now, because they saw the two physicians we had there looked like them, came from similar communities as them. And so I think programs like that Urban League is really facilitating is powerful and really engaging more Black and Brown students in STEM related fields.
I so thank you for that. And every single time we do an engagement like that, you'll see the light bulb flick on for young people, which is pretty amazing to see, because the backgrounds of our youth are varied. We have, to Elkin's point, some that have been in trouble and others who may be doing fine, because we want to celebrate both. We want to celebrate and encourage those who are doing well, but also help give the right environment for those youth who might not have had a fair start, right? And so every single time we do engagements like that, there's a youth saying, I think I could do this. I think this is something I want to do. And so yes, increasing interest is high on our list for young people.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. Jose Lopez, I'm sorry I didn't see your message until now. I know we're hopping back over to what Felipe was saying. I know you had something to add on to possibly the cultural side of things. So I wanted to make sure we got to you if you're still available.
So thank you again for the invitation. And I just wanted to basically a statement from Felipe. Yes, I mean, for me, it's the same deal. When I came here to this country, it was the first time that I learned really the whole different kind of cultural situation. From I come from, was never subject of discussion, or no something that we really kind of involved to, because I mean, and our culture was, who cares? I mean, who cares what is your skin color? So for me, I started to really be involved with the whole situation, think about it since I'm here. So, I like what Elkin was talking about, the break rooms. I mean, I have been using my own break rooms, if you want to put it this way, is like, as soon as I started to work here, especially in the Lighthouse, I've been there for 11 years, you know, with my friends and coworkers, African American, Hispanic, whatever. So, you know, listen, I always say where I come from, what is my perspective when it comes to culture, and I try to be totally open. And I have to tell you, my experience, I have a beautiful and great open relationship with all my coworkers, friends, brothers, sisters, regardless of color, skin, culture, backgrounds. Nothing, because if you look for the open conversation from the beginning, again, maybe it's not really comfortable at the beginning, but you make your point and you listen to other people where they come from, and have been worked fantastic for me. But again, it's totally new for me. The whole kind of, you know, racial kind of story for me was totally new where I come from.
Thank you, Jose. Your input is greatly appreciated. I did also want to know, since we have been going, the community, all of the communities have been going through so much trauma. Our Black community has really dealt with a lot going through with after the death of several of the Black community's individuals. So that's something that United Way of Broward County is working on, not just from individuals who work here. We also are pouring education into other areas as well. And one thing that we're specifically talking about here is our law enforcement. So I definitely wanted you to know that's something that is being worked on, especially through one of our amazing programs that actually Elkin helps to drive, which is our CIT program. While we're on this side of the topic, I definitely wanted to see if Elkin, you wouldn't mind letting us know how we're battling this this big issue through our CIT program by educating our law enforcement officers.
Okay, so thanks. So our CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Team. It's an evidence-based program that was started in the 80s with Memphis PD. And it was started centering the need for officers to really know the signs and symptoms of mental illness. And so it's a 40-hour training. So it's a week long that United Way facilitates and coordinates, and many of our staff members serve as facilitators. So what's unique about our particular CIT model and our approach is that the last 2 years, we've been intentional about including segments on implicit bias. And then my amazing colleague, Aisha, also does a racial trauma segment into the training. So we know it's important for officers to really have a good understanding of the communities that they serve, right? What are some of the biases that they have? So I like to say that we all, if you have a brain, you have a bias. So this idea that you're not going to be biased because you're a good person just is not true. So I start the class letting the officers know that, and then I share my own biases that I had to overcome, being someone who was raised in a traditional Haitian conservative home. And so meeting someone who was maybe doesn't prescribe to a particular religion. So we talk about bias and how it can impact who they give an opportunity to, who they give chances to, and also who they're more likely going to be aggressive with just because of their own bias. And then when it comes to the racial trauma segment that Aisha facilitates, one of the conversations or things that we like to point out is that when you're working in anti-racism space, do not say, I don't see color, because you do. Unless you're colorblind, you see color. What you want to say is that color doesn't impact how you treat people. And that may be true. But to deny seeing my color is to deny the very existence of who I am, because the fact that I'm Black, the fact that I'm Haitian, the fact that I'm a woman impacts how I interact the world and how the world interacts with me. So I encourage people, remove that phrase from your vocabulary, right? No longer say, I don't see color. You do. You just don't want it to impact how you treat people. And that's fair. So it's a 40-hour training. And so we're actually working right now to continuously enhance that particular training, to infuse more a restorative justice practice into that framework. And if you're familiar with restorative justice, it not only is a framework that focuses those who commit crime to acknowledge their crime, but also gives space for them to also be able to make up for that particular crime or whatever that is. And so we don't want anyone going to prison or jail because they have a mental illness and they just need services. So how do we make sure that our officers are more practice more empathy when they're interacting with the diverse communities that they serve?
Thank you so much, Elkin. Thank you for your hard work too. That's wonderful. What a wonderful program too that we have.
And I'm going to give a quick shout out if any of our, I'm probably going to reach out to some of our partners on here because I would love for them to be involved in the CIT. So I'll hit you guys up.
Thank you. So after all of the tragedies that have occurred during this COVID-19 time, that also helps me to segue into this next part of what have people who are differently able doing during this time. So I do have a question for you, Olivia. I received this question from a Next Gen United member who was very interested in wanting to know what the obstacles are that the deaf community has had to overcome during this time of COVID. And I thought, what an interesting question. So if you wouldn't mind to let us know, fill us in a little bit.
Sure, thank you for having me. So the access to communication and accurate information has been the biggest obstacle for the deaf community to overcome. The biggest obstacle is that people do not know how to reposition and pivot them to open communication. And with the masks, it has been a challenge to see the facial expressions and having the correct PPE for them. Also, the interpreters are not willing to go into places. So for example, if you called an interpreter to go into the hospital for a client, they might not want to put themselves at risk going into the hospital. So those are a few things that we have seen. So in instances like that, the family will try to communicate for the individual, but then at the same time, the hospitals are putting themselves at risk for lawsuits. So we've tried to help by turning to our social platforms like Facebook and Instagram and collaborating with Gallaudet and the National Deaf Service Providers by getting the information, to them and to help, provide as much access to that information.
Great, thank you so much, Olivia. Also, for Jose, I had another question from a Next Gen United member who wanted to know what our blind community is doing now that we're, again, in the time of COVID, how we've switched over to technology very strongly. So how does that work for the blind community with this extreme use of our laptops and our phones and things that are digital? If you would care to fill us in on how that is working for that community, please.
Yes, with your permission, I would like to add a little bit more to my former foreign speaker, because for us have been, as a blind persons and visually impaired, have been also a big challenge how to deal with the whole COVID-19. Because now that the communities and the business started to open, there's so many social distance rules that regardless of that, remember, we are blind, we rely on touch, we rely on trying on the trail or just being side guided by a person. So for us, is the business of the community still very close, and this has been a big challenge for us to try to get back in regular life. In regards of course, going to the technology part, important because we have been moving all our services. We provide, Broward, for example, over 2,600 people, we provide services. So now we have been challenged to provide all our services to our clients online. So if you have the younger folks, the younger populations, because at school they have been trained already to use their computers and online. For the seniors have been a challenge. So we have been very fortunate to have a staff of great case managers. So we have been able to provide not only the regular training that for skills, allowed to orientations or nutrition, but also support groups. The mental health situation have been really fundamental for us. We experience a heavy increase on depressions because again, now as a blind person, you cannot be outside because you don't have enough support by guidance. People are changing you know, even when you go to a supermarket, and sorry to go back to this part because it's really critical. In the past, as a blind person, you go to a grocery store and you went to the, you know, customer service office desk, and you ask for support to have somebody guiding you around. Now with the social distance, you don't have this person able to help you out. So very complicated. So that's the reason that they have been reaching out to us people with very kind of depressing increase. Technology have been big. I mean, not only the Zoom kind of, we have been able to provide so many classes through Zoom. We have, for example, summer camp. We provide summer camp for over 75 blind and vision impaired kids. And how can you deal with having the kids at home during the class and now during the summer? And so we were able to provide this type of classes to our kids, but was huge. And again, technology was a key component. We have like the Zoom, we have instructors reading books, stories, doing activities together, doing exercise. And also we was mailing out, you know, sending boxes with activities, food, and toys, and everything was possible to make that more for the parents and also for the kids and also for our seniors. But it's still technology. It's a big help for us, but still a big challenge how to reach out to our seniors.
Thank you very much for that insight, Jose. Greatly appreciated. And on that same topic, Olivia, I do have another question. Jose, this might be for you as well. Has there been a rise in ADA compliance with virtual meetings, since we have been heavily relying on those during this time?
It has been a little bit difficult due to the platforms we are using, and they're not really compatible for the interpreter. The obstacle is that some of the Zoom meetings aren't HIPAA compliant. So, however, though, Sorensen Communications just came out with a platform to address this. A lot of people are unsure of their ADA compliances, such as lawyers that had to be contacted to see if it was a breach of their rights, and just DHH, the deaf and hard of hearing community, not having full access.
Yeah, we have been able also to find another platform besides like Zoom to help, especially our seniors, because, you know, this is difficult for a blind and visually impaired person, you know, put so many numbers and quotes and stuff on the computer that is just phone based, very basic, but very helpful for our senior citizens.
Excellent, excellent to know. To be more knowledgeable about this, and to you don't know about other communities until you ask. So thank you for filling us in. So as far as hiring processes for both of your organizations or for these communities, how do you find that the hiring process needs to be handled without being exclusive to your populations?
When we have a specific job, it has specific requirements, and we're looking to fulfill that. Other aspects such as soft skills are supplemental that help us to narrow the hiring process down.
Great, thank you. So we were speaking a little bit with Courtnee earlier about what we can see in the future of Broward and our children who will one day be leading this county. So I did have a question. This can be, well, actually, you know, we have a STEM programs. We have that in several of our organizations. We also have people who are doing their own work to make sure that we drive awareness to the children who are being raised here down in South Florida and all of the different areas that they can be interested in and fall into in their future. One idea that I have in particular is a personal project that was done by Elkin, and it was to introduce children into the medical field. Is that correct, Elkin? What was the name of that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I talked about that a little bit earlier. That was something that I did on my own with Urban League, and we're actually still doing that. And the next phase is actually NSU has started a mentorship program with Ely High School. And then they're also going to expand that mentorship to actually include one of the programs, middle school programs. I think Shahara is on here, so she may know, but one of the middle school programs at Urban League actually funds. And so that's my work that I was doing on this just outside of my 9 to 5 around equity as far as creating access to STEM related fields. And then recently NSU, their dean of their MD program, asked United Way to sit on their diversity, equity, inclusion committee for their medical school. So I sit now on the committee and representing United Way. And so we provide guidance around what can they do to make sure that they're recruiting a diverse medical schools base. And right now I would say this incoming class, Aisha and myself, we just facilitated an unconscious bias training to their incoming medical school class. And I would say that's the most diverse group of medical school students that we've seen the last 3 years since they've been in existence. And it's a really good school. So one of the things that we're excited about that they took ownership of is that after the training, they were so moved, they decided to start their own club, and they're going to dissect 1619. So if you're familiar with it, if not, just I would suggest that you go to New York Times, and it's a really historical piece, and it really looked at just systemic racism, how it's embedded in the foundation of this country and how it infiltrates every single system, including healthcare. So we're excited about that. We're going to continue to work with NSU MD and provide guidance around recruitment. What does their faculty members look like? How do they maintain Black physicians in their medical school? What does their curriculum look like? So because of the work the training that I do, one of the things that they decided to do was include a diversity training in their medical school. So it's a great curriculum. And then one of the things that I love to recommend, that I always recommend, and I'm looking down to read it because I had to send a quick text to Aisha because she knows me. I love this book. So if you're looking for resources, there's this book called I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. It does a really great job of really kind of showing you or navigating what it's like to be a Black person working in nonprofit. This particular person I actually worked with in a Christian nonprofit, but you can apply this to any sector. And it talks about just the microaggressions that Courtney talked about. How can you be an ally? Because it has examples of her white colleagues, you know, really showing up for her in the workplace. And it was just a really moving book. And the reason why I recommend it, because when I read it, I was texting Aisha, this is my life. This is my story. I could have written this book myself, but I like to share that book just because I think I saw something about resources. So that's a great book to kind of give you an understanding of what it's like to be a person of color working in America. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on that I think Felipe talked about, which I think is important, is that we have a large immigrant base in Broward County. And one of the things that I think it's important to understand is that for many of us, right, when my parents, when they moved here, that's when they realized that they were Black, right? Because America makes you very aware of your Blackness or your otherness. And so I think that just because you are an organization that's made up of people of color doesn't mean you don't do the work of learning about the impact of institutionalized racism in this country. I think there's this assumption that just because we identify as a person of color that you know and you get it, and you don't. So you have to do the work. And then that also means addressing anti-Blackness that exists in other communities of color. And that anti-Blackness may exist because of colonialism that they experience in their own country, but we have to have really honest conversations about that too. I went off on a tangent, but I just wanted to kind of go back on that because I'm so happy that Felipe touched on that earlier.
Great, thank you. I think we do have a question too. I know we have a lot of people texting me questions. I know that Nathan had asked a question in the chat. If you would like to ask it out here, I can't find it again.
It is, where can you find resources and guidance on ensuring accessibility and inclusion for visually and hearing challenged folks?
If you don't mind, I was going to go ahead and ask that Sahara go ahead and speak to what Ms. Elkin has already said, and then I'll follow it up at what we're doing at the middle school level with regarding being very intentional with developing STEM careers. Sahara?
Sure, and of course, once we're done, we definitely would want to redirect back to Nathan. Just really quickly, the medical mentorship that Elkin mentioned, we had a meeting with NSU, and Elkin was there just to kind of be there for the conversation about how that's going to benefit our students. And we have multiple programs at Urban League. I encourage you guys to check us out on our website to see what those programs are. But we have an ABLE program, which is after school with some of our middle schoolers. We have National Achievers, which I oversee under the College Access umbrella. And then we have STEM, which Darwyn oversees, which are also middle schoolers at Silver Lakes Middle. And the National Achievers are Broward County, so they cover the entire county students from private and public schools. And so what we were thinking was creating a cohort of students in middle school to link up with a medical professional and provide a mentorship opportunity to them, whether they're an orthodontist, a pediatrician, any type of doctor in that field that can mentor them for however long we haven't identified, but just to give them, spark that interest and carry the conversation. And if the student is interested, that accountability will, spark the interest, keep the interest going through high school is the idea. And so that's kind of where we landed with that.
I think there was a question. Yeah.
I think Nathan was going to go first. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting for Nathan, I will go ahead and follow up on that. It's called being very intentional. As Ms. Elkin has said and Courtney has said so well, when you are intentional, like when you're recruiting an individual to play the piano or to be an athlete, you start when they're young and then you develop their skill sets and you put them around individuals that are 3 or 4 steps ahead of them to make sure that they are moving in the right direction. When you do that, you're cultivating not only the interest, but you're cultivating the ability to be able to go ahead and make mistakes and then grow in areas that you otherwise would not even thought possible. So an interest in biomedical engineering would not even be considered unless a student was identified in a forensic science class in 6th grade, and then strongly pursuing that forensic science class in 8th grade to the point where now they're linked up through the STEM Ready program with a pharmacist in New Jersey or a person who is teaching the forensics or even the biomedical engineering at a Berry University. Therefore, the students are now getting the full exposure and the ability of scaffolding all the way through. Then you have them have the opportunity to have a better conversation with their guidance counselor on classes that's going to benefit them and their career and not just the school. Oftentimes when you're taking an athlete or a musician, you're making sure that they get the best outcomes for them and not just the school. Same concept for trying to be a biomedical engineer, a pilot, like the pilots that we are familiar with, Barrington Irving, or even STEM media, or even the, as I call it, STEM is the new black, if you are familiar with that phrase. That is where you're going to be able to grow, develop, and provide the individual the opportunity to see someone who looks like themselves, whether they're Jamaican, or they from Brazil, or they're from Germany, and maybe mixed race. But again, they're going to see themselves as not having the skill sets if they don't have someone who looks like them and is taking the time with them.
Thank you, Darwyn. Tracy, did you want to hop in?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of go back. Thank you, Darwyn, for sharing. I know I'm backtracking just a little bit. Just to announce, I'm Dr. Tracy Perez. I'm the Regional Executive Director for the Center for Hearing and Communication. and Olivia has been doing an amazing job. But I just wanted to go back to Nathan's question about the presentations and the resources and the access of the information for the inclusion for the deaf and hard of hearing community, as well as the visually impaired. I find personally that there's not a lot of resources out there that give all the information. And what we've done as an agency is we go out and actually present to the individual organizations so that we can help to individualize what exactly are the needs within that organization. For example, we've also done a lot of work with the police department. Just like they have biases around the Black community, there's also a lot of biases around the deaf community. We've had a lot of deaf and hard of hearing individuals who have been shot by accident and killed because when they put their hands up or they go to reach for something because that's their mode of communication, a police officer has actually thought that they were reaching for a gun, and unfortunately they have protected themselves, and it resulted in death. So there's been a lot of education there, as well as we've worked with Costco, Publix. A lot of different organizations will call us and they'll say, hey, we have a deaf person. Could you come in and do an in-service training? Can you tell us what are the accessibilities? What are the best way and modes of communication to use? And sometimes that's even working with the individual that maybe they're employing, because that individual may have their own preference. So keeping it just DHH overall, and then maybe individual specific when there's like an employability situation. So as far as specific resources, the Center for Hearing and Communication is a great one for the deaf and hard of hearing. And I would say the Lighthouse for the Blind is a great one for the visually impaired as a resource to make sure you're providing inclusive services.
Thank you, Tracy. Do we have anybody else who has questions for our panel?
Just want to add a little bit in that regards. Yeah, we also really encourage businesses and companies to reach out to us, and we are more than happy to do presentations. And I have to tell you, we had also great experience when they come to paratransit or the public bus services. We have groups of, right now, of course, through COVID now, but before, so groups of the bus drivers coming to our agency because, you know, again, paper hold a lot. You can put whatever you want on paper, but seeing really the visually impaired or the blind, same apply for the hearing impaired, of course, in action, doing what we can do, what we cannot do, let's give it a better understanding how to approach a hearing impaired person or a blind or visually impaired person. But we are always willing to go out to the business and educate staff, and most important, management, because is the problem sometimes is more on the management level and to the staff, the co-workers.
Excellent, thank you. We are getting a little close to time. I do have a question from another Next Gen United member who is asking if we have individual. So again, back to our children and how we're in South Florida, where the marine industry is, and of course these different areas of diversity. Have we seen an increase of individuals from any of your communities who have had an increase in their hirings in the marine industry? Have we seen more women from your community, from the Black community, from the Hispanic community? Have we had more of the blind who have been hired, more of the deaf individuals? And whoever would like to take that question, you'll have 1 minute.
Okay. So our biggest goal is to expose our youth to different careers. And every year for the past 3 years, we've had the opportunity to take them down to Marine Lab, which is in the Florida Keys. And they've had the opportunity to spend 3 days there and actually have firsthand experiences with marine biologists, marine life. They go out on a boat, they collect different, specimens, they bring them back, they analyze them. It's a full 3-day program. They're just submerged into everything marine. And actually, a few of our students went off to college and pursued the marine industry and are now either a marine biologist or doing some, a scientist. So just us exposing that to them every, for the past 3 years, they've taken an interest to it.
Fantastic. Would anybody else like to hop in?
Unfortunately, the blind and vision impaired community, we have not seen any increase on hiring or interest to hire blind and vision impaired persons. Unfortunately, not yet.
I'll just go back to, what I shared earlier is that we're creating the appetite and the interest. We typically work with Title I schools with very high concentrations of students of color. And so the majority of the kids that we are working with are members of, the communities of color. And so it's hard to see if there's an uptick because that's typically who we are serving. But I would say at the conclusion of a program year that there certainly is interest upon those kids who now would like to continue their education in the area of STEM. And we've seen it not just through direct STEM programming, marine is a STEM, I'm getting very broad, but I suspect because of the interest and growing aptitude in the area that we would see an increase in young people venturing towards the marine industry.
Thank you. How about you, Felipe? Have you seen any increase in the Hispanic population hired into the marine industry, or any women who have been hired on more, or maybe men in women's usual roles? Or
so what we have seen over the past 3 years in partnership with the Marine Industry Association is, and this is work that we do as Reading High School, is that 75% of those students participated in the program are females. So that to us is fantastic news. And what we saw back in 2019, a year ago, because of course we couldn't have the program in 2020, is that 60% of those girls were actually from South America. So we have seen an interest. Going back to Courtnee, it's really hard to measure because for the most part, the children and students we serve are students of color.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody. We are coming close to time. I know I didn't get to everybody's questions just yet. I think Kathleen Cannon, are you on here? I saw you earlier.
My name is Catherine, and it's Kathleen Cannon. For the speakers, I want to thank you so much. Folks are so busy, and this is overwhelming. We know that our community and our world actually has a health crisis, economic crisis, and a racial justice and inequity crisis. For you guys to take some time out to have this conversation, I want to thank you. I always learn something when I'm listening, and it's gut-wrenching at the same time. Felipe, I appreciate your honesty because I have to look at myself with my white privilege, and I have to speak out and speak up. And I'm trying to educate people because they don't understand some of those terms. So when you come on and educate each other, deaf community, blind community, I never thought about a deaf person trying to raise their hand to communicate and somebody's taking that as a threat. So we have so much to learn about each other. And I think there's some DNA, we're like 99.9% all the same and just such a little bit different. But yet the difference is what's the beauty about all of us and the different steps that we've walked through and the different experiences. The color of your skin should never dictate somebody's success, somebody's education, or somebody's judgment. So I just want to thank you so much. And Catherine, thanks for hosting the conversation. Providers, thanks for leaning in. Thank you for educating me always. And being brave. I want you, Elkin, Aisha, everybody on this, I want you to call me out because if you don't, I won't learn. So So full permission. And I adore you all. Please be safe. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being donors. Thank you for believing in each other as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And yes, thank you again to all of our panelists for being here, and to everybody who wanted to learn more about all of these different areas in our community, our very own backyard. So again, thank you to our donors. Thank you to our Next Gen United donors, our Women United donors, our Tocqueville donors, our organizations out there that are helping to make Broward County better every single day, even during COVID, especially during COVID and for after as well. We do have a lot of great things coming up this year. While we will be doing a lot of things virtually, I did want to let you know about our next event, which our next Gen United event will be September 15th, and it will be a happy hour with cat dogs. So keep your eyes open for the next upcoming event on our events list, unitedwaybroward.org/events. Thank you all again for being here today. I look forward to seeing you at future events as well. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Good stuff, Catherine.
Thanks for being on, Brooke. Thanks, Aisha.
Cheers.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thank you too. Bye.
Bye.